This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Welcome everyone to the Asia Business event series focused on supporting Sydney SMEs engagement with Asia and to equip Sydney-based SMEs with key insights and capabilities to explore business opportunities in Asia. The aim of this session is to support your economic recovery and future growth plans. And today's session will focus on e-commerce opportunities in Southeast Asia. So again, warm welcome to the Asia Business event series. The session is really focused on capitalizing your e-commerce opportunities in Southeast Asia. And as part of this session, we'll be essentially looking to equip Sydney-based SMEs with key insights and capabilities to explore business opportunities in Asia, all part of your supporting your economic recovery and future growth plans. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all present today and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending the online webinar today. Just in terms of some key housekeeping, the session will be recorded, and I'd encourage you all to please put in your questions through the Q&A session functionality that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Again, warm welcome. My name is Shiraz Engineer, and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy and Capability with Asialink Business. And it's my privilege over the next 2 hours to walk you through a program that's been designed specifically for SMEs. And the way we're going to look at this event over the next 2 hours is we've got a program that essentially focuses initially on a panel discussion where we've got an exceptional lineup of guest speakers from a range of different backgrounds and sectors. And we'll be having this facilitated session discussion till 2:15 AEST time, and it will then be followed by a session on key considerations when developing your e-commerce strategy. So what are some of those different elements, models, platforms, supply chain considerations that you need to look at, branding and localization for your marketing, as well as some of the risks and next steps as part of developing your e-commerce strategy. So that's really where over the next 2 hours we'll be spending our time. And once again, I'm going to request everyone to please submit your questions that you may have through the Q&A function that we have. Now, I will shortly be introducing our panel members, but first I'd like to introduce Councillor Koch from City of Sydney. Now, Councillor Koch is the Deputy Chair of the Cultural and Community Committee, the Economic Development and Business Subcommittee. Councillor Koch was first elected to council in 2008 and served as the Deputy Lord Mayor from 2011 to 12 and re-elected to council in 2012 and 2016. What's most impressive over here is Councillor Koch is a passionate advocate for cross-cultural awareness and he's committed to further strengthening the vibrant relationship between the city and its Asian communities, both locally, nationally, and internationally. So with that, I'd like to please welcome Councillor Koch to say a few words, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second of our Asia Business events for 2021. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of our land, and pay my respects to their elders. I also acknowledge the people of the 200 nationalities who live in our wonderfully diverse and multicultural city. On behalf of the City of Sydney, I also welcome today's guest speakers. Karen Sermon, the Trade and Investment Commissioner at Austrade, based at the Australian Embassy, Bangkok. Boyd Whelan, the head of cross-border commerce, Bukalapak, aiming to connect Bukalapak's customers and sellers to worldwide markets. David Levers, the export manager for McCain Foods Australia, managing Australia and New Zealand export strategy, and Francisco Wijojo, the managing partner of Arkblu Capital, a multi-asset private investment firm primarily focused on the venture capital asset class in Indonesia with offices in Jakarta and Sydney. This past year has been incredibly difficult for most businesses, small, large, and in between. So the city is pleased to join Asialink Business to deliver the Asia Business Events series to support our local business community. The local business community is very important to the city. It's the main driver of the city and is businesses here. And coming out of the pandemic and recovery from last year, it is very important, and we're very grateful that Asialink Business has been able to put this series on, and we're very happy to partner with Asialink Business again. So today is the second of the three events. Last month, the focus was on the international education sector, which is, a very important sector for New South Wales. Today, we are looking at the e-commerce for retailers, and in the third month, it will be on trade diversification. Asia will be critical to our recovery from economic effects of COVID pandemic, and I think our small and medium businesses are looking for advice on how best to grow and develop their links with the region. And with our panel of speakers who have a wealth of knowledge and the experience really is most important, and will be able to guide us through that. They understand that now is the time to intensify engagement and look towards opportunities in the long term. Sydney is uniquely placed, both geographically and culturally, to develop strong links with Asia, bolstered by the fact that we have a very significant proportion of our population coming from a whole range of Asian countries. You don't have to look very far. This city of Sydney, we have Asia on our doorstep. We have Thai town, Koreatown, and Chinatown, all within walking distance. It is fabulous, and to see a sprinkling of so many Asian restaurants, Malaysian, Indonesian, in the city, and it's bustling again. Right now, it's very heartening to see people coming out again, and business starting to flourish again. So it is very important for our city to have that kind of vibrancy. The city of Sydney also runs our Lunar Festival, which we had this year as best we can under all the COVID requirements, health requirements. And it has been the largest such event outside of Asia. And it includes all our multicultural communities, and that fosters greater cross-cultural understanding, which is, I think, very important in terms of understanding how business is done in Asia, in Southeast Asia, how people react to the different situations. So it is therefore it is very important, and we are very, very fortunate today to have a panel of speakers who have that kind of experience. There are also free trade agreements already established, such as the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and others that are opening the way for businesses wishing to engage beyond our own borders. The first part of session Untold is the workshop and discussion with all our speakers. And this is followed by an overview of the e-commerce landscape and suggestions for models in establishing an online presence. It also look at supply chain models for distributing products, nuances in marketing, social media and brand building, canvas high-level risk, and key considerations for implementing your e-commerce strategy. So I would like to thank all the panel speakers here once again for sharing their expertise, their knowledge here today, and taking their time. So I hope this is an enlightening and fruitful discussion for you all. Also like to take this opportunity to thank the Asialink Business staff who made all this possible. So I wish you a great discussion fruitful one this afternoon. Thank you.
Councillor Koch, thank you so much for that. And if I could just pick up on two things that you've actually said over here, which is really important from our perspective. And the first one was where you've mentioned over here to look for opportunities for the long term. And I think that's a really important message, is that when we are looking at whether it's Asia, whether we're looking at Southeast Asia, we do need to be considering everything from a longer term perspective. And I know that can also be subjective sometimes when we say what is the long term. Sometimes we consider that 6 months and 9 months and 12 months, but really it is taking a long term horizon. And what we will be doing at the end of this session as well is be providing a number of different useful links to not only assessment tools, but also some thought leadership to read. And that will really give participants a view of what it means to take that long-term view and invest. The second point which you mentioned, which is again really important, is Asia is not there. Asia is right here. And I love the reference that you have made to Thai Town, Koreatown, and Chinatown as well. And it's such an important message as well to understand the local diaspora that we also have in the market, and to see how we can use that to build connections and build our partnerships for the future. So thank you for that. I'd like to now invite each of our panel members to say really say a few words about who they are, because they can do a lot better job than I will in introducing themselves. And then just a little bit of background about what we'll be getting into as part of the discussion. Just coming back to the panel members that we have Karen Sermon, the Trade Commissioner in Bangkok for Austrade. We've got Boyd Wallen, Head of Cross-Border E-Commerce Bukalapak. We've got David Levers, who's the Export Manager for Australia, and Francesco Widojo, the Managing Partner for Arkblu Capital. So with that, if I could please invite Karen to say a few words about what we're seeing about e-commerce and the trends in Southeast Asia.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's a delight to be joining you today for this session. I'm dialing in from Thailand, where I'm based at the Australian Embassy in Bangkok with Austrade. I'm representing today my Austrade colleagues across ASEAN to share with you some insight around the changes we see both in the COVID context, but also in the growth of this region, to help you understand how you might best engage in these markets and to consider e-commerce as a channel. So as you would all be aware, Southeast Asian markets have a lot of similarities. We talk about things like the growing middle class, increasing online connectivity and digital engagement, and increasingly social media savvy consumers, in some cases more so than Australians. But of course, each market has differences. Before I dive into e-commerce, I just wanted to talk about a few things that you should look into in understanding these markets and whether they might fit your export or export expansion plans. So thinking about GDP per capita as an indicator of purchasing power, looking at the contestable market. They're very big populations, but who are your customers in these markets? Are there competitors, and is there a gap for your product or service? As Councillor Koch mentioned, there are FTAs including with Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia in this region, as well as the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA, we call it ANSFTA. So look into these and find out whether they may create advantages for you. And importantly too, the regulatory setting. Can you in fact export your good to the country? Are there any specific limitations or requirements? So when we turn to e-commerce, remember it is a channel through which you can enter or expand into a market. Unlike China, in most cases in Southeast Asia, you still need to register your product with the Food and Drug Administration or a similar body, just as you would by selling through bricks and mortar. And so whilst it may not fast track your market entry, it can still open up access to more consumers and to leverage the growing trends towards digital consumption. So you can see on this slide, when we talk about e-commerce in ASEAN, my colleagues in the ASEAN team have helped develop this slide. We talk both about marketplace platforms such as Shopee and Lazada, which are present across a number of markets. We also talk about social media platforms through which e-commerce is in fact transacted in a number of markets in this region. So the importance of social media savvy consumers is not just about them sharing information and pictures and communications, but in fact looking into brands, into products, and actually making purchases. So if you want to take a screenshot here, I'll just talk you through what the icons mean. So Indonesia, for example, and this is in priority order, they shop via Shopee, Tokopedia, Bukalapak, which we'll hear from, and then the social platforms, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook. Top product categories sold through e-commerce include beauty products, so I'm just looking at the icons, health and wellness, general grocery, and fashion. And modes of payment are online banking, cash, and digital wallets. So understand and work through this slide, the different products and categories and payment methods, and you'll be well on your way to considering both your export and e-commerce strategies. Now, just before I hand across, I'll just explain there in the product categories, you've got mother and baby down on the Malaysia line, and you've got further down with Philippines household products, which is the house, and electronics and IT for Singapore, and credit cards as the fourth most commonly used payment method. So happy to be here. Look forward to answering more on e-commerce. And with that, I'll hand across to Boyd. Thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Boyd Whalen. I'm head of cross-border commerce at Bukalapak. Thanks very much for having me here today. Bukalapak is one of Indonesia's largest e-commerce platforms. It's one of the top three, as Karen just showed, along with Shopee and Tokopedia in the region. And our platform, Bukalapak, has over 100 million users and over 1.4 million daily transactions, which seems like a huge number, but that also includes digital services. Bukalapak, uniquely among the top platforms, is an Indonesia-only platform. So while like Jakarta and the city hubs in Indonesia are important markets for us, our key strength is actually our geographic spread, which is unique among the large e-commerce platforms in Indonesia. So we have a very strong presence in second and third tier cities throughout the country. And a very important characteristic of our customers, which is true for all Indonesian consumers, but especially for Bukalapak's customers, is that they like to chat before they buy. So on an Australian e-commerce platform like eBay, or if you're buying off Kogan, chatting to the merchant before you buy an item is probably less common. In Indonesia, it almost always happens. And our Indonesian customers, they like to speak Indonesian. So they'll ask things like, is the product ready? Is the product available in blue? And the speed of response will really impact the success of the merchant or the seller. But I'd be keen to emphasize that doesn't necessarily have to be a large hurdle for an Australian business. As Councillor Koch mentioned, there are a lot of Indonesian and Southeast Asian people living in Australia, or second and third generation Indonesians in Australia who speak fluent Indonesian. So it's not a difficult thing to kind of outsource or get a part-time admin assistant or a student to help you run your e-commerce customer service and order processing in Indonesia. But it is very important to pay attention to the level of customer service you are providing. And some Australian products have already seen great success on Bukalapak and on other Indonesian e-commerce platforms, such as vitamins and healthcare products. A lot of these are sold by resellers or distributors, so not necessarily directly by Australian businesses, but there are a few different modes that you can use to launch your products into the Indonesian market. So Bukalapak is a very large platform, Tokopedia and Shopee as well, very large platforms. So it's definitely worth exploring Indonesia as an option if you're interested in getting involved in e-commerce. And if you are looking to build a brand name, then platforms like Bukalapak have a great deal of advertising and marketing packages available. We, for example, one of our largest investor is the largest television network in Indonesia. So we have access to production houses and marketing teams and advertising teams, and very happy to work with brands to build their marketing and advertising strategies. So I'll leave it there for now. We can go into further detail in the questions. And I'd like to pass on to David. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. It's great to be here to be able to speak to you this afternoon. I'm currently the export manager with Bubs Australia, which is a manufacturer, marketer of infant milk formula and baby food. The company was founded in 2006 and listed on the ASX in 2017. Our hero products are our infant milk formula. So e-commerce is a very strategic play for us in the market. I've been exporting to Asia for well over 10 years, and with Bubs Australia, I've been with them 2 years. So been active in the market, looking at e-commerce, exploring all the different platforms and how we enter the market with our products, plus, you know, following up on the normal offline distributor models, etc., that we use in and for export in the different markets, and depending on the market entry strategy on which model we use. We're currently on in Malaysia on the Lazada platform and looking to extend that further onto other platforms, and also in Singapore on the Redmart platform, and looking to extend our product portfolio and ranges on these platforms. There's a number of barriers to entry for infant milk formula into these markets around technical regulations, meeting their specifications. So it does take some time to work through all of those technicalities to be able to enter the market. So I've certainly learned a lot, continue to learn a lot, and it's just an evolving space, and it's very, very exciting given the fact that I think e-commerce moves much quicker than the offline retailers in strategies around the marketing, what they do to engage with the customers, consumers. So very, very exciting space, and one that, you know, has been a great journey for me to be involved with. And I'll now pass on to Francisco.
Thanks, David. G'day, everyone. It's Francisco Wijojo here. So I'm one of two managing partners at Arkblu Capital. Arkblu Capital, we're a multi-asset private investment firm. But we have a very strong focus on the venture capital asset class in Indonesia. Our venture capital strategy is twofold. We take both direct equity or equity-like interests in early stage technology companies with a focus on Indonesia, but we also acquire limited partnership interests in venture capital funds, also with a focus on Indonesia. We currently have a portfolio of 6 companies, 5 of which are headquartered in Indonesia, 1 of which is headquartered in Australia. And the types of industries that those companies operate in, they include direct-to-consumer retail, health, wellness, travel tech, SME tech, as well as virtual reality and deep tech. We're sector agnostic. We invest pre-seed to Series A. We write initial check sizes of up to $500,000 US, and we're sector agnostic. However, we have a focus on B2C and B2B2C, and that's by virtue of the fact that Arkblu Capital, we are part of a larger group of affiliate companies, and those companies, they operate within the consumer goods, health, and manufacturing industries in Indonesia. Arkblu Capital itself, we have offices in Jakarta as well as Sydney. And like I said, we're part of a larger affiliate group of companies that was established in 1977. However, Arkblu Capital itself, we were established in 2019. Here in Sydney, I'm based out of Haymarket HQ. Haymarket HQ is Australia's first dedicated startup hub dedicated to helping SMEs as well as Australian startups expand into Asia. I'm also the New South Wales Secretary of the Australia-Indonesia Business Council, and we're involved in things such as negotiating the ICEPA, which Councillor Koch very eloquently described, as well as the fact that We are also very involved in ecosystem building activities and running very similar events like this, very much focused on Indonesia. In terms of my role, I see many things in terms of the startup space as well as the brand space. We see a lot of overseas brands, American brands, Australian brands, Japanese, Korean, and Chinese brands entering into Indonesia. And with that, I'll be providing some insight as to some of the conversations that we have with these particular brands and what they should be looking out for with a focus on Indonesia. Like everyone has said here, Indonesia is it is a very large market within Southeast Asia. It's the predominant market, and there are a few cultural nuances when it comes to importing and exporting into Indonesia. I think I'll hand it over now to Shiraz.
Thank you very much for that. For that introduction, everyone, and I might just now look to request for everyone to put their cameras on and to come online, because I'd like to kick off the discussion, but just on something that a number of our speakers have spoken about on Indonesia and the growth that you're actually seeing in this market. And based on some statistics that we've looked at and projected revenue when it does come to e-commerce, the numbers for Indonesia are actually close to talking about revenues of 48.7 billion is what's expected in 2024. And when you compare that to some of the other markets in Southeast Asia, you still have large numbers. So Thailand is at 10.6 billion is the projection for revenue in 2024. Malaysia at 7.9, Vietnam at 7.6, and Philippines at 6.3. But you can clearly see over here, Indonesia is being pegged over here at 48.7 billion in terms of projections in revenue. So with that, and I'd also like to thank the audience members for the questions that are starting to come in. And I'd like to direct the first question to Karen on what are some of the key trends that are we seeing in Southeast Asia e-commerce markets as a result of COVID-19? So if I could direct that first one for Karen, please.
Thanks, Shiraz. Well, you've sort of captured the headline, which is the enormous growth in frankly all of the markets. When I was doing a bit of research, Austrade published an e-commerce report looking at 2015 to 2018 e-commerce growth, and it quadrupled over that period for ASEAN markets. We estimated at that time we'd get to around 102 billion in transaction values across ASEAN by 2025. Recent reports by Google, Temasek, Bain & Co have put that number at 172 billion. So as you said, it's grown, and it's grown quickly, propelled very much by COVID. Now, why is that? Well, a bit like Australia, there's been a change in the way people behave and consume products and the way they even purchase products. We're seeing that right across markets in Southeast Asia. So away from in-store and towards preferencing online and home delivery. But generally speaking, digital consumption is up. So how much time we spend online has on average grown at least 1 hour per day during the lockdown, sort of mid-year lockdown periods last year.
I might look to bring Boyd into this to just build on that point over here on what are some of the things that businesses now need to consider when they're deciding on an e-commerce platform in Southeast Asia, knowing some of these trends and preferences that are occurring over here. What should be some of the things SMEs need to consider?
Thanks, Raz. I guess the first thing I would mention when you're looking at the Indonesian market is that there are several very large e-commerce platforms, and the differences between some of them are fairly nuanced. So I would actually recommend being quite open to launching on more than one platform. So for example, the largest Indonesia only platforms are Tokopedia and Bukalapak. And if you are launching on one, it might make sense to launch on both, because the hardest part of getting started is preparing the products, the titles, the descriptions, the photos. And once you've done that once, copying that to a second platform is actually quite simple. So That's the first thing I would mention. Second thing is, as I said before in my introduction, some of these products already exist in the market, even if it's by being sold by resellers or individuals who are bringing them in their luggage. Sometimes it gives you an opportunity to search on these platforms and see the price points. So you might be surprised by what is already available. Just have a look for comparable products on each platform and see if you can kind of see the difference in pricing, and you might get some idea of which products are more popular as well on those platforms. So just that kind of initial market research helps a lot. We're fairly upfront about the fact that our Bukalapak's target market is, although we have a large presence in Jakarta, our strength is the second and third tier cities. So very expensive products need, kind of very special or targeted marketing strategy. You might not be going for mass market appeal on Bukalapak for those products. Having said that, there are certain categories like baby products where people are willing to spend higher amounts. But it depends at what kind of prices you're looking at and what category you're selling into. Another very important thing, obviously, is the Indonesian language support. So we very highly recommend working with an Indonesian company as your enabler, who can provide operational support to you and customer service, or hiring an admin or outsourcing in some way the Indonesian language customer support and the operations in terms of processing orders, printing the labels, all that kind of thing that will be needed to run your e-commerce platform. So those are two things that I would mention, which are very important to get ready.
Thanks for that, Boyd. And again, you've mentioned a really important point on pricing. And on that, I'd actually like to bring in Francisco, because what you're seeing over here is, what is the kind of approach that we're seeing companies take when it does come to pricing of products? And as Boyd mentioned over here, if you're focusing on tier 2, tier 3 cities, really thinking if your product's a premium one, you might have to reconsider on the form. So what are some of the considerations companies need to be aware of? And perhaps even what are some common themes or mistakes sometimes companies make with their pricing?
Yeah, sure, Shiraz. Yeah, that's an amazing question, and it's a great question. And I think following on what Boyd said, I'd love to take a step back and look at things from a more general macro level when it comes to Indonesia. So when we look at Indonesia compared to other ASEAN countries, ASEAN is obviously an association of 10 Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia of which is the largest when it comes down to population. However, when we look at the individual country by country profile, we start to derive a lot more interesting insights. So for example, purchasing power parity, GDP per capita, these are very general metrics that people use when they look at country by country spending. When we look at Indonesia and we compare that to, say, other developed markets within the broader region, such as China, such as Japan, the purchasing power parity and as well as the discretionary income of an average Indonesian, assuming we take an average of both tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, it is much lower than a Japanese consumer or a Chinese consumer. So although Indonesia has a population of 275 million, if you are, say, an Australian, assuming you're building an offline B2C product, and assuming that, and because we do see that most Australian exporters, they are building or developing premium Australian products, then I would have them look at, okay, what is the most ideal market within Southeast Asia, depending on that. Because if you want to build or sell into Indonesia, and you want to sell a mass market product, then price is a very important consideration, because if you have a premium product, you will not be selling a mass product in Indonesia. It's as simple as that. However, if, for example, you do still want to target the Southeast Asian ASEAN market and you are selling a premium product, then you should be looking at the more developed markets into that, such as a Thailand, such as a Singapore, such as potentially a Malaysia and Brunei. So I think that's probably the largest misconception that people have. Indonesia is not a China, Indonesia is not a Korea, Indonesia is not if we look in isolation when it just comes to price, it is not a Japan, it is not a Korea, it is not a China. You cannot build or sell a mass market product into Indonesia that is a premium product. And when we are looking at our deal flow, when it comes to startups that are building a brand, using technical terms, building a D2C brand and wanting to sell into Indonesia, and they think that it can be a mass market product, we give them a bit of a check, because it's not possible. You can't sell a mass market product that is a premium product in Indonesia. The market is just not there yet. And if that's what we are trying to do, then we'd say that either reconfigure your value proposition for that particular product or rethink your market. So that's what I would say.
Thank you for that, Francisco. And again, a really interesting point on looking to consider your, based on your product, whether it's premium or not, considering which market. And we've got a question over here that's also come through. And David, this one's directed at you, which is effectively with Bubs Australia. It's focused on two different markets. One is on Malaysia, where you're on the Lazada platform, and Redmart for Singapore. If you could share with us what your journey was like and some of the challenges that you faced early on when trying to implement your strategy in Malaysia, and what were some of the things you had to do to overcome that? I think that would be interesting to hear your insights on that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is just understanding how the platforms work. They don't all operate the same. So it's understanding the model that the platform operates. So for example, Redmart in Singapore purchase the stock directly, and then they deliver it to the consumer. So essentially for import the stock, first and last mile. And then so with Lazada doesn't import the stock directly into Malaysia. So therefore we have to get the stock into Malaysia. So therefore, do we need a distributor? Do we need a e-commerce company to manage the platform specifically for us? So it's just working out, I think the challenge was working out how we deal with those different models, because one size doesn't fit all. So I think that was the biggest challenge. And then I think just to overcome that, it was just working through all the different options that we could use in Malaysia. So with the Lazada platform, we needed a distributor to import the stock. So was the distributor going to deal with the Lazada platform? Were we going to deal with the Lazada platform? So it's just working out, I guess, those challenges on the best way forward that suited us, and also maybe the distributor, or how we went to market in those in Malaysia on what model we chose to use.
Thank you for that, David. Karen, I recognize you may have got cut out a little earlier when you were talking about some of those e-commerce trends. I'd like you to look to just see if you could complete that question over there that we had on some of the key trends, but then also building on that, on what can some of the companies start doing to prepare for their e-commerce strategy? Oh, we might have, Karen might have dropped out again. I might actually now go back and look at this one. We've got a question that's actually come in as well, which is on, is organic getting a demand in Indonesia? Boyd, I might look to put this to you in the first instance to see if there's a demand that you're seeing for organic products within the platform.
Yep. Yes, thanks, Shraz, and thanks for the question. I think that building on what Francisco said, there is a growing middle class in Indonesia, and it's not at the same level yet as it is in Singapore or probably Thailand or some of the other countries, but especially in Jakarta and Bandung and some of the largest cities, there is a growing awareness of the importance of health and quality, ingredients and products, and that has led to an upsurge in demand for not just organic but kind of premium products, especially in cosmetics and healthcare. And on Bukalapak, for example, one of the kind of unexpected side effects of the pandemic was that baby products became one of our top categories. And definitely the bulk of that would be, cost affordable baby products basically, but there is also an uptick in demand for premium or organic products. But again, I agree that it's not going to be a mass market solution if it's a premium product. So probably one thing I would add, which builds on what Francisco was saying, is that some of our sellers actually, they have a strategy built around Singapore as a hub and storing products in Singapore, for example, and using that as a base, and they can test the market in Indonesia. So that's definitely something that's possible. You don't have to commit immediately, 100% to just Indonesia. You can. There's a couple of different models you can choose to test the waters first.
Boyd, thank you for that response over there. Another question that's also come in, and this leads on from a point that was made around customer service support in Indonesia. And the question really is around the kind of, what dialect would be most important to offer your online customers. Noting that, in Indonesia, you've got over 17,000 different islands.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I guess that's one positive thing, is that basically everyone shopping on e-commerce platforms in Indonesia will be able to communicate in the standard Bahasa Indonesia, the national language. Although it's a very informal version of the language, so you do need a native speaker who is able to basically speak in slang. So, for example, I studied very formal Indonesian, and I find it quite difficult to kind of communicate in text in the language. So it's a very informal version, but it is just the standard national language.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Boyd. Francisco, I might look to come to you here on, we're talking about pricing, and we're talking about products, and if they're premium products, and potentially with some of these platforms, you're looking more at tier 2, tier 3 markets. But what is it that some of the businesses could be doing, and the importance of leveraging digital media and social media when it comes to building a brand presence? We also know there are these terms that get used of building a cult and a brand cult. What are some of your thoughts on what businesses need to do to adopt that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's an amazing question. So I guess the premise of today's webinar is e-commerce, and I think what everyone needs to understand, exporters and professionals alike, is that e-commerce, and it was mentioned earlier today, e-commerce is a distribution strategy. Now, before that distribution strategy, we need to look before that, there is the product, and then surrounding the product itself, we have a brand. E-commerce is just a distribution strategy, but it is not a branding strategy. So what would allow people to get to the e-commerce platform itself is the brand that is being created. So what we've seen when it has come to direct-to-consumer brands, and the ones who do it best, and like you said, Shiraz, it's a term that is quite commonly coined within the D2C space. It's building a cult behind your brand. And how does one build a brand from a very mechanical sense? It's very easy. You look at what social media platform is most apparent in building a brand in Indonesia, and that's Instagram. So building a very consistent brand with, let's take an example of a clothing brand, because that is clothing and fashion is something that we're quite familiar with. We're investors in D2C brands that have a presence within fashion. We see very consistent branding. We see things that are very modeled towards the Indonesian millennial. We see very consistent content. We see Indonesian models being used. So I think with that, you need to build something that the Indonesian consumer can resonate with. Again, this is something that you need to do before you get to your e-commerce distribution strategy. Because at the end of the day, the e-commerce platform itself is where people will transact. But before that, you need to build the brand to incentivize people to get onto the e-commerce platform itself. So this whole concept of building a cult, I think it's a very good concept because it allows brand owners to really know what it means to build a brand that stands out. Because like I said, and like many of the other panelists said, Indonesian, all consumers are very price sensitive, but because the purchasing power parity of Indonesians is lower than, say, more developed markets, then therefore what will make your brand stick is the presence of a brand itself. So price sensitive consumers, but with a very strong brand, it's what will make you stand out. So again, e-commerce is a distribution strategy by itself. However, we need to look at, okay, what is that brand that would allow people to get onto the e-commerce platform in the first place?
Francesco, thank you for that. And I might look to go back to Karen if we've got Karen back. Karen, can I check if you're online with us?
Hi, Shiraz, can you hear me?
Perfect. Thanks, Karen. And we might just let you keep your video off at this stage. Could I go back to that first point that you were talking about on some of those key trends that you were seeing as a result of COVID-19 in Southeast Asia? But then just building on that as well, what can companies start doing to prepare for their e-commerce strategy?
Sure thing. So apologies, everyone. You've seen firsthand some of the changes. That is us all working from home and navigating the tech gods on a daily basis. So here we are. So I touched on just the growth. The projections of growth have astronomically increased, and that's good news for everyone contemplating now an e-commerce strategy. The reasons why it's been propelled by COVID include some of the obvious ones, the changes in consumer behaviour that we've all displayed ourselves, moving away from in-store consumption or shopping towards preferencing purchasing via online platforms and opting for home delivery. But overall, it's interesting to see that digital consumption is up in many measures. So how much time we spend online. A report by Temasek Holdings, Google and Bain & Co. looked at this between 2019 and 2020. And on average, we're spending at least an hour a day more online. What we consume, as I said, includes obviously the growth in products via e-commerce and food delivery, but also things like health and education that have really been pushed into the online domain far more quickly than we would have expected without COVID. And interestingly, their research said that 1 in 3 users of these digital tools and services were new, and 90% planned to continue those new habits. So it's not just a sort of flash in the pan. It's not something that's a point in time. We think this is a real transition towards long-standing habits that people will display. Another thing that's been driven by COVID is the changes both in payment preferences, and that's of course driven the development of digital payment options. So cash as a payment method was very preferenced in Thailand when I got here 2 years ago. Overall in ASEAN, it's shifted from about a 48 or 50% preference down to 37%, whereas e-wallets have gone in the opposite direction, so about 18 to 25% over just that 2019-2020 period. The downside of COVID is, of course, and people have touched on it, the economic impacts. So there is a softening of purchasing power in some markets. It's a long drawn out process. It's easy to forget in Australia that COVID is still very much live and real for us here in the region. In Thailand, we've just had our 3rd wave, so there's lockdowns again. But there are a lot of people still consuming. There are a lot of middle class consumers opting for online, and I think you should still feel confident that these markets are viable and that e-commerce is a good way of tapping into that preference to digital. If I just quickly touch on some of those strategies, so it's been covered a little bit by other speakers, but as Francisco was just saying, the market is not simply the population size, it's your contestable market. So thinking about who you sell to. Is it men or women? Is it 18 to 24-year-olds or retirees or new mums? And dig into the data, both the data that platforms or marketplaces will make available, but a lot of public reports to help you look at where your market, your target market, your demographic is at scale and is growing. And think about, you know, just testing some of those obvious but important points like product registration, how that works in your focus market, whether you need a distributor, as David has talked about, how long it will take, what the costs are, and so on. And then importantly, thinking about the actual process of importing and scoping out some prospective partners. The final point I just say, again, it's been touched on, is looking at the social or branding strategy. Putting a product online doesn't, by definition, make it a sale. You really need to invest money and time to get visibility and exposure for your brand and your product. And that's a critical part of your online strategy. So looking at how other brands have done it, looking at case studies and talking to companies who've forged the path before you are all really important steps in your research and will help you win and win more successfully, more quickly, sorry. Thanks, Raz.
Karen, thank you for that. I'd like to build on this with David, and it's some of the questions that I see coming through as well over here. David, you know, given you were talking about, you know, as part of those initial steps, those challenges, as Karen has also alluded to, you know, getting through those registrations and going through that process of understanding, do you use distributors, you know, resellers, what's the model that you're going to look at? Those are some of those early stage challenges. Now that you've been in the market in Malaysia for over 2 years, what are you seeing some of the, I'd like to touch on both, what are you seeing some of the advantages and benefits, but also what are some of the current challenges you still face in this market and some of the strategies you're now working to tackle them?
Well, I think Francisco mentioned very, very well in regards to how you continue to support the brand. E-commerce is a distribution channel. So I think the biggest challenge for us and ongoing is how do we support the brand and also the product in these channels. So, you know, and it's very similar to what we've done here, is how do you engage with the customer? You know, is it through Facebook? Is it through Instagram? How do we get them following the product and then therefore engaging on the platforms to actually purchase the product? So I think it's an ongoing development for the brand and the branding of the product in these countries as you continue to build your presence. It just doesn't happen overnight. And I think the other thing is that there is companies in these countries who have a great grounding on how e-commerce works, how they can touch with the customers, how they can build your following, and there's an investment required with any marketing, but it's how we continue to do that and build our customer base. I think it's the biggest challenge ongoing.
Thanks for that, David. And I'd like to again build on this point over here where, you know, at the end of the day, from an SME perspective, you know, budget becomes a really important element in the amount of money that can be spent. And we know that, you know, within e-commerce, it's not just about setting up on a platform and then paying a commission fee. There are, you know, numerous other costs that are involved, including warehousing, logistics, licensing, registration, insurances. Boyd, I'd like to put a question that's building on some of the questions that have come through as well, is what advice do you have for SMEs to get the maximum impact with a limited budget?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think firstly that probably in any market, but particularly in Indonesia, you're going to have more success if you have stock that is in Indonesia, which means that firstly, the freight cost is much cheaper because you can use sea freight or bulk freight to get it here, but also the fulfillment time will be same-day delivery in most cases, because we just have exceptional domestic logistics networks here. So that's the first thing, is kind of making sure that you have stock in the country. A second thing is considering whether you want to work through a local enabler, which is, I think, as David mentioned, a company that already has great expertise on, on Bukalapak and the other platforms. And some of these enablers work on a commission basis or revenue share basis, which means the upfront investment required from you is minimal. They'll need branding materials and the distribution rights and that kind of thing, but they're incentivized to help you get sales, which is kind of the best kind of arrangement. So that's another thing to consider. And maybe the third thing I would mention is that in our experience, when you're looking for bang for buck, as opposed to building a brand image, so two different things. If you're looking for return on investment in terms of sales, often the on-platform search promotion or marketing tools offer the best return. So the equivalent of Google AdWords, but within the platform, which means that, for example, on Bukalapak, when a customer opens the app and searches for t-shirt, if you've paid for the search promotion service, then your product will rise near to the top. And the data from Bukalapak shows that has a really good return on investment. But conversely, it's not going to help build your brand name for the long term.
And boy, there's a question that's also come through over here. As part of these strategies, does Bukalapak or other platforms assign sort of account managers and things like that to support SMEs? Because it's a great point on setting up these search terms and for promotion within the platform. But there's so much to understand over here. What kind of support gets provided typically in this space?
Yeah, that's a good question. It tends to vary depending on the types of products that you're willing to commit to the market, whether you're willing to have stock in Indonesia and the price points you're willing to offer. On some platforms, you will be able to get an account manager. So on Bukalapak, a lot of our cross-border sellers do have an account manager. I think Blibli also and Shopee have account managers for their cross-border sellers. I think in any case, on any of the Indonesian platforms, you can reach out to the advertising or marketing people, and they will be happy to meet you and discuss what kind of packages are available. They often have, well, firstly, you can invest in certain packages to build your brand name and drive sales, but you can also do something called co-investment, which means if you have your own social media presence, often they'll do like-for-like investment, where if you feature the platform on your social media, they will give you a certain amount of credits on the platform for your products, that kind of thing. So there are a few different permutations available.
Thanks. Thank you for that, Boyd. And again, building on it, David, I'd be very keen to bring you in over here, and if you could share with us, we always say benefit of hindsight, and I always like to refer to it and joke around that I have not just 10/10 hindsight vision, but 20/20 hindsight vision. What would be some of the lessons learned over the last two sort of e-commerce strategies that you've implemented with both Malaysia and Singapore, and knowing what you now know, what would you do differently?
I think it's, for me, I mentioned it earlier, it's just knowing the model and how they work. And then I think the other big understanding is knowing the costs that you are potentially going to incur through whatever model that you choose to operate within the e-commerce platform. I think, there's lots of other learnings too along the way, how they operate, the promotional offers. It's probably, I would suggest, one of the biggest learnings and a very steep learning curve for me once you start dealing in the platforms on what you need to do, understand the business model, how it all works. And I think the other thing is around how we get help talking to other export managers or companies in regards to, their experience with the models, these enablers as well, very, very good resource. And I think the enablers is, one of the most valuable resources. Now, obviously there's a cost, but, from my experience, you understand it better than trying to understand it yourself. And for me, I will be certainly, for my learning and, for Indonesia, I'll certainly be connecting with Boyd to learn a lot more about the platforms in Indonesia and how we can potentially operate on those. So, there's a lot of information out there. It's just seeking it and then understanding it along the way and then making your decisions based on your costs and what you can support and then what model you want to run with. So it's a journey. Yep.
Thank you for that, David. And I might lead that back into a question for Boyd. Given this is a journey over here, Boyd, what would be sort of next steps for participants on this call if they'd already assessed and they'd done their research and they identified, Indonesia was the market for them, and they've considered, and you made a really important point early on where you said it's not, look at multiple platforms, because often, we see this in a number of markets in Southeast Asia and in Asia as well, where people go online to research which other platforms is this product on, how popular is it, and by seeing it across multiple platforms, it automatically gives them a view that this is, a really popular product. So what would be some of the next steps if that were the case for participants to get their products on a platform?
Yeah, so for Bukalapak in particular, the key step would be to contact, I can share an email address and you can contact us directly actually, and tell us a little bit about your business and what questions you have, or whether you're interested in trying to register to sell on Bukalapak. Registration on Indonesian e-commerce platforms is, in my experience, far simpler than in the US or in China. You'll need your company registration certificate and some basic details, contact details, but it's a fairly straightforward process. So probably there's two key things to work out before you begin. The first one is logistics. So you need to look at which model you will choose. Will you have stock in Indonesia, or will you be trying to fulfill parcels when orders come in, so using air freight? If it's the latter, then you need to try and contact a logistics company and get quotes. So whether you're using DHL or another company, the costs can be quite high. So it's important to compare the price of your item to the cost of the shipping, and then try and get that strategy clear in your mind first. And the second thing is payments. So how will you accept payments? At Bukalapak, you can do an international bank transfer. There'll be a small fee attached to that. Or we'll soon be able to offer Payoneer, for example, which is an international payments provider, which is relatively simple to register for, but it's just important that you understand how you'll actually get your money back if you're making sales. But yeah, happy for participants in this seminar to contact us directly through an email that maybe Shiraz I can share with you, or through the chat.
Absolutely, that would be excellent, and it's really good for me to hear you say as well that you're looking at the payment areas. Karen mentioned early on that you've got a number of different modes of payments, and you are seeing cash. There's been a slight drop in the way the cash payments get processed. But again, an interesting point over here is, terms like that you have on cash on delivery, pay later are not uncommon. Great to hear about the tie-up that you're looking to put forward with Payoneer, noting that there are other sort of fintech companies who provide those currency conversions like Airwallex and OFX as well. So, so great to see that. Great to see that happening. Karen, I might go to you on this one to ask a question over here on what support can Austrade provide SMEs in relation to commerce?
Thanks, Shiraz. Just confirming you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. And apologies, I'm just keeping my video off for bandwidth here. So there's a number of things Austrade or more broadly the Australian government is doing to help Australian SMEs grow their business internationally. Some of you may have heard of a new initiative called the Agribusiness Expansion Initiative. It was announced in November, and it's a $72 million package that's all about hiring more people at Austrade in Australia and with the Department of Agriculture, and putting more people into roles in the region. Here in Southeast Asia, we'll have 7 new business development managers, specifically to help with agribusiness and food companies to understand and expand, and that will include navigating e-commerce strategies. So we haven't got a specific call to action on e-commerce, but I'm certainly happy to share activities and resources as they become available to this group via Asialink, and I'd encourage you all to get involved in those activities under ABI, as we're calling it. We're also pushing a lot of content online because people like to consume that. And as I said, it's more comfortable for many people in the COVID context. So under the website export.business.gov.au, Austrade is working with some algorithms and a lot of our intel on the ground here in the region to curate information on, we've now got about 3,500 agribusiness and food guides, as well as guides across a number of sectors and markets to help you find the information in one place, because we know it's often difficult to navigate multiple sites to get a picture and to understand what you can and can't do as you grow your export strategy. There's just a couple of other initiatives. You may have heard some of the existing exporters of the Export Market Development Grant. This is something that Austrade manages on behalf of government, and it helps to, it's a reimbursement program, essentially up to 50% of eligible marketing expenses can be reimbursed. We topped that up another 208 million last year. And this is, so think about anything you're doing, including market research, partner identification, attending virtual trade shows, spending money translating materials to go online, etc. These could be eligible expenses through which you can claim a rebate, and that runs for 8 years worth of claims. So as you're ramping up your export strategy, please do look at the EMDG program. There's also finance support through Export Finance Australia. So if you secured a contract but you needed some cash to manage or to bridge an investment in producing more product, for example, you could contact Export Finance Australia to assist. And finally, I just wanted to touch on the International Freight Assistance Mechanism, also run out of Austrade. For anyone that is looking at sort of higher volume air freight shipments to fulfill orders or to push product into market, the freight assistance mechanism was invested into to support what we see as a bit of a challenge around supply chains, particularly those reliant on air freight, and the exorbitant costs that a lot of businesses were facing with reduced passenger plane capacity. So look into these. I'm also happy to share an email, or if anyone's got their pen at hand, abby@austrade.gov.au is where I'd encourage you to go as a starting point to reach us. Thanks.
Karen, thank you for that. And I might get you to, provide that email ID again, as we've just done with Bukalapak as well. We've put that in the box that it's been put into all attendees. I am conscious of time. I've got time for, I think it's probably we'd look for one more question over here, which has come through. And Francisco, I might look to put this one towards you for this one, which is, what is the perception of foreign versus domestic products, or what is the perceived sentiment towards local brands and sort of the value for money that they might offer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think what we've seen within Indonesia, especially over the past 10 years, it's very similar to what is happening in, say, China. So there was a time, say 10 to 15 years ago, where it was quite clear within the B2C space that international foreign brands had, I guess you can say, a higher perception amongst the consumer sentiment. However, as we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years, that has slightly shifted, and there are very strong homegrown brands within the B2C space that are gaining significant traction. I'll provide you two clear examples and people who are Indonesian or operate in Indonesia within the health and wellness space, they will know about this. There is a cosmetics company called Wardah. They're relatively new, they're 10 years old, but they're very much amongst the top market leaders when it comes to the halal makeup product category in Indonesia. And another very strong local brand is a brand called Erha, so a skincare brand. So these companies, Erha is a bit old, but when we look at this compared to, say, international brands, I think if you are a foreigner, as in someone outside of Indonesia, and you assume that just because I have a foreign brand, that therefore I can come into Indonesia, build my brand, and because I am a company that is manufacturing my product in Australia, that I will succeed. I think you need to be very careful about that, because that is a very old mindset, and it's a mindset that can potentially lead to your demise. And I think we've seen this in China as well, because there are very strong local brands that are being built within China within the exact same industry. So the perception is, if you have to summarize it, yes, local, international, one can argue that amongst the mass market, that an international brand would be more highly perceived. However, that trend is definitely changing, and we can definitely see that within the B2C space, whether it be fashion, whether it be health, whether it be wellness, it's definitely changing. And again, I would say that it all has to do with your branding. Just because you're a foreign brand or a foreign product, you can't just rely on your foreignness for your branding. You need to do a bit more than that. And I think this is a trend that will continue developing up to the point where we'll see very strong brands in all B2C verticals within Indonesia.
Francesco, thank you for those insights over here. I'm conscious of time, and so I'd like to bring this to a close. But in bringing it to a close, I'd first like to ask one final question for all panel members, and which is, what are your final piece of advice or recommendations to SMEs looking to enter into Southeast Asia? So one final point for the SMEs and our retailers on this call. And Boyd, I'd like to start with you first, please. Final recommendation or advice.
I think my piece of advice would be, once you've given it some serious thought, is to reach out to an enabler and have an introductory conversation with them, because they'll kind of give you the quickest shortcut to quite good insights into the market and what will be required for you to be successful in Indonesia, at least.
Thank you for that. Karen.
Thanks, Shiraz. Yes, I'd say, test the information you hear, verify and verify again, and don't be lured into agreeing to things that you don't feel comfortable with in Australia. So stick to your business principles. Don't get caught out by a too good to be true offer. Verify and verify again. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. David.
Yeah, very similar to what Boyd said, and understand that it's a journey, and just know your costs that you're potentially going to incur from some of these e-commerce platforms, because at the end of the day, it may not be a cheap option for you to actually sell some product.
Great point, David, over there. And last, could I please invite Francisco?
Yeah, sure, Shiraz. I would say number one, Southeast Asia is a collection of 10 countries or 11, depending how you count it. They're all very different countries, so don't assume that it is a one single market, which it's not. And number two, when assessing those markets, I would look at three things. Number one, price. Number two, your branding and how that would be vis-a-vis the country. And number three, your potential ability to localize your product and brand.
Francesco, thank you very, very much for that. Now, with that, once again, I'd like to thank all the panel members today for their incredible insights, and recognize you're all located in different parts within Southeast Asia as well. So thank you so much for making the time to be here. To the participants on the call, thank you so much for all your questions that you've been feeding through. I hope you found this insightful. Now, just to let you all know, this is only the first half that we've completed. We've got another sort of 40 minutes that I'd like to share some insights across some of the e-commerce components that we've been talking about, and just sort of fleshing out a bit more some of those elements of the models, the e-commerce logistics elements as well. But I just first off want to say once again, thank you so much to all the panel members. You're more than welcome to stay on, but now we'll swap over and go into the e-commerce component. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shiraz. Thank you.
Thank you. So you'll shortly see the slides come up. And again, with this part of the session, please feel free to put forward any questions that you may have. Now, I just want to mention that, you know, we are going to go through, we're going to finish it at 3 p.m. Again, AEST, that leaves us with precisely 41 minutes. Typically, this kind of content would, you know, we'd go through it over a half a day or a 4-hour session. So just note that what I'm going to be talking to you at this stage is rather high level, and it is to give you a view of, again, what are some of the key elements that need to be understood as you embark on your e-commerce journey. Now, starting off, I want to just put forward, we'll be talking about in terms of the program, we'll be talking about your e-commerce models, we'll be talking about supply chain models, we'll be discussing some of those social media elements as well, which form part of, you know, the branding component, as well as some of those high-level risks and considerations as part of your strategy. Now, when you think about e-commerce again over here, I'll touch on, when you see this element that we talk about, the landscape, and Francisco said this really well just now, where he said it's comprised of a lot of different, you know, 10 different markets or 11 different markets, depending on how it's viewed. And one of the things I'm going to just encourage everyone to please, in the Q&A box, feel free to submit. But when you see this image over here, what is it that comes to mind when you see this? And often, you know, just reflect on this and feel free to put it in the Q&A section, just your thoughts on when you see this image. But often what gets said to me is, I see a lot of green, I see a lot of blue, I see a lot of brown. And then people say, and when I say dig a little deeper and go into it, people go into saying, yes, I see Asia, or I see an opportunity, I see a population of 1.3 billion. And the key point over here is that, yes, we might use this term over here, that Asia and, you know, Southeast Asia, but, you know, all these markets are so diverse, they're distinct. You have to treat each one of these markets like they're their own country. And often, even within that market, you've got such distinct elements that exist. And, you know, we haven't talked much about Vietnam in the session, but, you know, really important as part of Southeast Asia as well, you know, understanding how North Vietnam to South Vietnam operate, and the business culture, the way they approach discussions, the way they approach meetings, the way they deal, the way they negotiate is different in just Vietnam itself, between the North, Mid, and the South. And so when you start thinking about, you know, Singapore, and you start moving, you know, further north of there, and you look at Malaysia, you know, different drivers, different points of views. You know, we've had a few comments that have come through on whether it's, beauty, makeup, and what appeals to these markets. In Malaysia, people think about it as, eco-friendly and safe products is what they're looking at. They want small and lighter products. Whereas, and it's also halal is a really important element. There's, strong interest in beauty, skincare, makeup products that have the halal certification. Whereas if you think about Singapore, which is not very far away, they're extremely environment friendly and health conscious. So even that, really those drivers become really important to understand who your consumers are, what's important for them. And there's an increasing importance, for example, again, on referring to beauty blogs and things like that. People are taking a lot of interest. So just note over here that when we are talking about this market, it is really diverse. Now, the next slide that I have over here really talks to, when you look at this market, you can see that there are, numerous different players over there, the likes of Lazada, Shopee, we've got Bukalapak. Just note that even when we use the term Lazada, and we know that Lazada is situated in prominently across in Southeast Asia, the rules, regulations behind how they operate, how they get governed is different in each one of these markets. So I just want to again make it really clear that, for organizations that might think of Lazada Singapore, doesn't mean the same rules apply for Lazada in Indonesia or for Lazada in Malaysia. So just being aware of that becomes really important as you're going into this journey of e-commerce. Now, the next slide that I've put up really for me becomes an important element of substantiating the fact that Southeast Asia is really an important market. And you see the likes of Alibaba and Tencent making investments across a number of different regions within Southeast Asia. But the important part over here that I want to draw your attention to is that when you think about e-commerce, as what's been said before, it forms part of your strategy, but e-commerce is not just, there's more to e-commerce. So to consider the fact over here, there's, the payments, the finances element, you've got the logistics that we've spoken about, logistics services, content, social media. So just note that when you are looking at these tech giants like Alibaba and Tencent, they're making those investments across what I'd like to refer to as the ecosystem within e-commerce, and that becomes a really important point as you move forward with considering e-commerce. Now, we have spoken about the different types of platforms that exist, and Karen had a great slide where she highlighted within each of the platforms what are some of those key segments or key categories that are doing really well, what are some of the key trends when it comes to payments. But again, the most important point over here with all of this is picking the right platform based on that product or service, that based on the product that you really have that you're putting forward. That becomes really important. So just because Tokopedia is top of the list doesn't mean it's going to be right for your business. So and the only way you know that as well is undertaking that research which needs to be done, or as Boyd and David have both alluded to as well in the previous section, which is look to activate those enablers, leverage people on the ground as well who can provide those insights become really, really important over here. Now, I'll move into the e-commerce platforms component, because this is where things start getting quite interesting on what are some of those different elements can be used when you're thinking about your business model and part of your strategy. So the three sort of core elements, if you want to look at your business models, are you could look at a marketplace, which, as we've discussed over here, are things as Boyd's talking about Bukalapak, but you've got whether it's Tokopedia, Lazada, numerous models that platforms that exist in the market. But even when you look at these platforms, you need to be thinking about, are you going to be setting up your own flagship store on in this market? Are you going to be looking at selling your products through like the retail model, which is effectively you've just got a space on that particular platform. So think about that as, you're within a shopping center, and within that shopping center, you've got a small stall over there, as opposed to having your own flagship store. So it's just thinking about what are some of those elements that need to be considered when you are looking at a marketplace. Now, when it comes to websites, you can look to set up your own websites, and you've got, the likes of BigCommerce and Shopify and Magento that have really simplified what it takes to set up your own e-commerce website. There are still complexities involved, and I'll touch on that shortly on what some of those considerations are. But just note that is another option for businesses. But you do need to again think about over there some of those the logistic elements, the payment solutions that you need to be putting forward. Noting none of that's going to be provided. Where if you were working with a platform, there'd be some solutions available to you. And the last is really the distributor or wholesaler model, where you actually have a distributor wholesaler who could support you. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you over here, and thank you for those as part of the Q&As that you're feeding through on some of the insights that you're seeing already over here. But again, I'm going to encourage you to start thinking about when you are seeing this image in front of you over here on some of those e-commerce platforms, and I'll go into this on the next slide as well, is just be aware of how your products need to be placed. And what I mean by that is to think about over here, if you are looking, you can see that there's whether it's some colors that you see on the screen, the kind of descriptions that need to be put into into the detail of your product, not just in the actual description, but even in the actual header. So there's typically what we see over here, and I'll move on to my next slide. Will give you an example of what I'm referring to. So when you see this image on the left-hand side, you've got Lazada, where I'd put in over there skincare as a category. And on the right side, I've put in skincare on Amazon Australia. And I just again want to encourage participants on the call to please, through that Q&A function, just send through any comments that you're seeing when you see these two images over here. What are some of the fundamental differences that you see between the Indonesia platform and the Australian platform? And I'm going to encourage you to just let them come through. But what you do see over here is that in terms of visuals, you normally see a lot more products that are over there. It tends to be quite overcrowded. You might see a lot of the color palette. You see a lot of bright colors, just try and draw people's attention to it. You can't see it on this particular one, but the use of QR codes is not uncommon. And then there's a lot of more emphasis that's also provided to discounts that are being offered. So there's what's the actual advertised price, what's the sales price, how there's free delivery being offered over here. There's a lot of emphasis that's provided over there. There's promotions. You'll have coupons that are listed over there, which again goes back to a point David had made on truly understanding all the costs that are involved when you are looking at e-commerce. So all this needs to be factored in. Now, another point that was also made earlier was make sure that you're doing your research on these markets, because it's not just as simple as saying, I want to enter into it. Karen has mentioned this, and so has Boyd, on doing your own research, understanding what are those price points of similar sort of products in the market. And one of the tips that I've put down on the slide as well is that if you are using Google Chrome, you can actually right-click on the platform, right click on it and say translate to English. And what it'll do is that anything that's in the local regional language will get translated into English. Where it doesn't work is if it's an actual image that won't get translated, but you will be able to understand how companies have put forward, the descriptions in English then, and that gives you a bit of an idea on what you can be doing for your product. But more importantly, it's looking at that competitor landscape to understand what are some of the price points that exist over here. Now, again, some really important elements to understand when you are doing this is it's not just as simple as just putting up a few images, static images, which we've typically done, or we normally do when we are selling, if we are selling locally over here. There's a lot more that goes into your into that digital component and digital branding. And what I mean by that is, often we see sellers over here putting in videos. They've put videos of the product. They put videos of how the product can be used. So if it's a food item, it's then how can it be used in your cooking? If it's an actual, if it's a product that, a beauty or makeup product, you might have, an influencer over there, or part of your branding over there is a video on it being applied or where it comes from, noting the market that you're operating or you're moving into. If there's those elements of organic, how can you show that sustainability element and the organic element really come through? Highlight and promote that based on, again, the market and the demographic that you're looking for. Now, again, when you are looking at your marketplaces, there are things which you need to consider. These elements of profit margins. You need to understand like the kind of complexity that it takes in setting it up, the kind of control that you might have over the website, as well as in terms of the branding. So those are some important considerations to give. And what I mean by that, again, is that if you have your own website versus a platform, the kind of control you have over that on your website would be a lot higher, whereas you'd have a sort of a medium level of control if you've worked the marketplace. When it comes to branding, again, you are restricted with marketplaces on what can be offered. But if you had your own website, you can do as much as you wanted to over there. But just also remember the complexity when it comes to marketing is actually a lot higher when you are doing your own website versus when you're looking at a marketplace. And that's also got to do with the fact that, the marketplaces are established. There's already, recognition, the footfalls there. So you've already got a place. Now, the important component, as Boyd also mentioned, was when you are on these marketing on any of these platforms, is to make sure to look that you're on multiple platforms and not on one single platform. Again, the benefit over there is, as Boyd had mentioned, was initially, yes, you've got to get all your, the product registration, your social media, the digital, the videos. But once you've done all of that, it's just replicating it across the other platforms. So it's worth giving that serious consideration. But again, when you are doing that, make sure you're selecting platforms that are fit for purpose based on your product. Now, David did mention, and he put a lot of emphasis on costs and truly understanding the costs that are involved. And I'm really glad he'd done that, because as SMEs and as retailers and businesses, often, when we think of e-commerce, we think of the, that e-commerce setup fee, or we think of the fee of, it might be the registration fee initially, but then after that there is, might be a commission. The commissions can range based on your product. They have different e-commerce platforms have different commissions that get applied. But over and above that, you've got to be aware as well of the shipping costs that get applied, and we'll touch on that in logistics as well. But if you are sending goods in bulk, you are sending it more regularly, that can become a cheaper way as opposed to sending it air freight. The inventory management costs, which you need to consider, which would be, the kind of rent, the rents involved if you are going to stock your products locally. Got to think of that as that liquid capital that's tied up. In terms of insurances, there might be product liability insurances. There's, supply chain ecosystems have also put in a number of disruption insurances that have been put forward. And then, of course, even with COVID over here, there are some surcharges at times that are getting applied. So just being aware of, that's those costs over there. Of course, you've got your licenses, certifications, which might include any sort of registration fees. If it's from anything in the food and agri space, food certifications that might be required as well in your local markets become really important. I always say returns and refunds are a really important component, and you really need to be thinking about reverse logistics and how your products are going to be returned. So if for any reason, as we've said in some of these markets, you still have cash on delivery or pay later functionality available, what happens when a customer doesn't want the product and wants to return it? How are you going to process those returns? And you don't want to be caught out over here. So you really want to be thinking about, if I am going to process those returns, am I again going to have them sent back to me, in real time, one at a time, or am I going to store them, and then once I reach a certain volume, certain dollar value, or certain number, I'm then going to have them shipped back? Thinking about the costs of storing when that's happening, that really, again, needs to be factored in. Advertising, marketing becomes really important. We've spoken about the importance of social media, thinking about Instagram, the use of key opinion leaders or KOLs in certain markets, and depending on your product. So just note that becomes a really important part of your strategy. And then last but not least are the taxes that are involved across the different Southeast Asian markets, and I'll touch on that again shortly. But often, and there's a question over here that's also come up on when it comes to advertising and marketing, what should the budget be? And I could say that is a great question, and unfortunately, there's no right number for that. Typically, organizations sometimes use a percentage of revenue that they want to be putting towards marketing spend. And the follow-up question to that as well is, even within marketing, how do we develop budgets for it? So typically what we've seen, again, and this is broad and it's not for any one particular, it won't apply to everyone, but to think about, if you are doing any sort of research and consumer research, market research, think about allocating anywhere between 3 and 5% of your marketing spend towards some of those research to understand what's happening in the market. Think about the e-commerce apps that you actually might need to be doing or investing in. That can be quite a significant amount, could be as high as 30% of your marketing spend. You want to be thinking of media companies and media retainers that want to be applied over here. So anything of making sure that you've got that presence, you're continuing to build your brand, and it's not just one time. You're constantly reinvesting your time and money in that. That can again be anywhere between 10 and 15%. And of course, you always want to be thinking about localization of your branding, of adjusting the messaging to your market, and making sure you're doing the right things with translation services. So they become a really important component of the cost. So I hope this slide over here gives you a flavor of what some of those high level cost components are, and then noting within each one of these segments, you've then got the next level of detail that goes into these costs. Now, when you think about supply chain and you think about logistics over here, Boyd mentioned this early on. If you think about, sort of two key methods or models are, if you have your your products locally in the market, and consider this the 3PL or local fulfillment method or third-party logistics that's on the ground in the market. This is a great way of sending your goods in bulk for warehousing, and it's in the market until they're sold. Often what will happen over here, the order gets placed, an order comes through, product gets picked, packed, and sent to the consumer. Last mile delivery all happens over there, and that time frame to delivery is really short. It could be, as Boyd had indicated, 0 to 2, literally, on the same day or within 2 days. In Indonesia, different markets, there's slightly different routes, but noting the delivery time becomes very, very fast. And of course, when it comes to, to shipping fees and times like that, that all gets quite reduced. But the cost over here, again, that comes into play is you need to be able to adequately forecast what the volumes are going to be, because you don't want to have too little sent, but at the other time, you don't want to have too much stock. So it's trying to understand what that right amount is going to be. And that's obviously very, very hard for businesses early on. Very hard for businesses early on to understand what that's going to be. And so as an option to try it, and another way to look at considering what can be done, you've got the cross-border shipping, which is effectively where everything gets shipped from the local market in Australia. So you're basically, the order comes through, it's cross-border shipping, you're putting it across the stock, no stock is being held overseas. But what happens with this is that the unit price tends to become quite high with it, and even with terms of actual the time frame to get the products to your customer can take a while. Now, there's a question that's come through over here on what could be a good checklist before we move forward with as part of your e-commerce strategy. And I'd say that's a great question that's come through. For me, I would say the key sort of 4 key things that you need to be considering are, can your product be shipped internationally? And for this, you want to be looking at your product's HS code, which is harmonization synchronization code. Essentially, your freight forwarder should be able to assist with this. So the first thing is, can your product be shipped internationally? The next thing you want to look at is, do you need any sort of local registrations for that product? Depending on the model that you're using, it becomes really important to understand local registrations. The next is, do you need any local labeling or product labeling into the local language being done? Now, again, this becomes really important, and it's part of that registration process, but you need to pay attention to if you do need to translate your product label into the local language. And the last is, you need to consider if you need an importer to import the goods, would be the final step of the checklist, in my opinion, over here. And what that importer as well, what you want to be doing with that importer is also considering over there, what are those tax and import duties that might need to be applied, which would ultimately affect your price, and becomes really important, because when you are quoting a price to your end customer, they want to know if taxes are included. That is normally the way to go. But if taxes are not included, then it's being really, really clear with them that this, might exclude, that this excludes any taxes, and that they need to pay for that afterwards, which ultimately can have an impact on your returns, because when a customer is looking to pay for it, typically they're looking for that final price. So if they then have to pay duties on top of it, it could lead to returns, as well as customer dissatisfaction, and them placing that on as part of the chats and making a note over there. And in these markets in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of preference that is given to researching and looking at opinions. So it becomes really important to make sure that you're dealing with any dissatisfied customers really swiftly and quickly over here. Now, the last last sort of slide that I have over here comes back to that point of which Francisco had mentioned, that when you are looking at Southeast Asia, there it is not one market, and I'm hoping by looking at this slide you'll see some key elements, and I'll draw your attention right at the top where you have the different tax-free thresholds that get applied. An interesting point over here with Indonesia is it used to be $75 used to be the tax-free threshold limit. That got reduced to $3 back in 2020. It got reduced, but just noting that these changes happen. The next thing that I wanted to draw your attention to as well is this term that gets used on a VAT, which is a value-added tax. Now, you can see that you've got value-added tax, which is the third row at the bottom. You'll see that over there across a number of the markets. But in Singapore, you've got GST. Now, again, it is all Southeast Asia, but the tax that's applied over there is a different tax. So it's a goods services tax, which we have in Australia, but the term VAT, which is a value-added tax, is different. Now, again, the VAT that gets applied across different markets ranges. So just to that original point of even going back to that very first slide, which I showed you on, the different markets that, when you saw the map of the world over there, and I pointed out how you had, elements of brown, green, Asia, noting that Asia is not one thing. And then even within Vietnam, I explained to you how you have, north and south and the mid part of Vietnam as well. Just note that complexity exists even over here. Now, I'll move forward into branding and localization. And again, very, very high level out here again is just understanding. Really important point is when you are thinking of business culture, you truly do need to have what's important is to have a good understanding of the market, who your customers are, what is the consumer behavior, what are some of the cultural traits that apply over here. So things like life experiences, thinking about the kind of influencing factors that apply, noting that again you have elements of collectivist societies, understanding, what does that then mean? What kind of value gets placed on group cohesion, harmony, the importance of family? And based on that, automatically to that earlier point, word of mouth recommendations become really important as part of that, influencing your products and influencing purchasing behavior. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into, considering the market, what best align with your product, but even the strategy that you then use for marketing. And I'll let you all take a screenshot of this bit of a journey that you look through when you are looking to build your brand. And I'll touch on each one of these very, very briefly as part of the images that we have, but I'll let you take a screenshot of the text that's over here. But really, when you're thinking of your customer, think about customer behavior, think about their preferences. And the example that I have for you over here is like when you see this image on your screen of honey and toast, which is a very conventional image we'd have if we're promoting honey. But noting in Southeast Asia and a lot of markets in Asia, honey isn't typically consumed on toast. Honey is consumed, in teas. It's got medicinal properties. So think about how your product is going to be perceived in that market, and then look to shift the positioning of it. So instead of using traditionally what we do, and if we were advertising or promoting our product in Australia or in New Zealand, look to shift that to see how can I position it in a way that really resonates with the market that I'm looking to target. The next one is around thinking about how you gain insights. Now, this is again a really important point that Karen had mentioned. doing your developing your insights on the category. So really looking at what are some of those key trends that you're seeing in the market, understand how your product is performing. What are some of the key elements that's driving adoption of your product? And again, those insights will again come through by way of whether you leverage you leverage those enablers to really get an understanding of the market. You use whether it's consultancy or advisory services, but truly understand what are some of the things that are happening within the market now, but also looking at what's going to happen in the future. The next is really around placement, and this comes down to relevance in the market. And you see some great examples over here. And I'm not suggesting as a retailer, as an SME, that you need to completely come up with new products or new product flavoring, but it's this thinking about positioning. And you see, for example, Blackmore's over here has said, when we know it's a really competitive market in Southeast Asia. And so what they're saying over here is give your child every possibility and every probability to succeed as they're prepping for their exams, because it's such a competitive market. They need to be thinking faster, they need to be thinking smarter, and our omega high vitamins over here are perfect. You've got companies like San Remo that have developed local flavors. Now again, I'm not suggesting that you have to change the composition, but thinking about what can you do from a positioning perspective potentially to help engage with your or resonate with your consumers in the market. And so they've come up with angel hair and Marmite sauce and penny goreng, and in Thailand there's a penny fried crab in yellow curry. So just noting that there are some things that can be considered over here, or again, Blackmore's with the halal and stressing on that importance of it. So again, it's just about thinking back to your market, back on those insights that have been gained. How can we position this for our target market? Now, the use of key opinion leaders and setting up stalls, for me the most important thing is being authentic. That becomes the most important thing with any of your messaging that you're doing. So again, as a retailer, we might not have the budget to bring in a key opinion leader. Key opinion leaders can charge anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000, upwards to $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 as well. Now, what that means though is that going back to your product, going back to your strategy that you're putting forward, understanding if KOLs or key opinion leaders are actually going to work for your product, that becomes a really important consideration. But the most important thing to remember over here is to be authentic. Again, you've got examples where Blackmore's was promoting their vitamins in Thailand. You also have KitKat that set up a concept store where they got people to engage with the chocolate, come up with developing their own ingredients, had localized flavors put into it, like KitKat mango, sticky rice, and things like that. But again, most important thing, whatever you're going to do over here, make sure you do that in an authentic way. That becomes really important. So if you've got a message, a story to share, there's a heritage behind your product, an 80-year-old or 100-year-old family business, bring that in there. If you can talk about back to that quality or organic, bring this in. Talk about that sustainability element that you're bringing forward. If there are any unique product features, the origin, production processes, talk to that. Build a story around your brand. That's what's important. And by building that story, be authentic. Moving forward really quickly, this slide really is back to that point that we've said it's an ecosystem. So just be aware, at the end of the day, e-commerce platforms, it's not just the platform. You're looking at a variety of different elements, the payment systems, the logistics, the socials, noting all of that to become a really important component of your strategy. Now, I'll touch very briefly again on that risks component, and the key element when it comes to risks is understanding that yes, the risks of IP, logistics, regulations are all important, and the ways to manage that and mitigate that are seeking advice from experts, and especially when it comes to IP, which is on the next slide. But the real reason for one of the main reasons for customer disputes, and I'll touch on that one only, is customer disputes mainly arise when you haven't factored in pricing correctly, and they've had to bear the brunt of some additional tax that's come through, or an additional charge. Or it could also be the fact that the product's faulty, it's been damaged during the transition period. So just being aware that can have an impact on some of those risks, which again means how do you manage your returns. Now, when it does come to the regulatory environment, I touched on that when I spoke about taxes, but just note over here, my key point to you is that when you are looking at regulations in these markets, important to understand from a cross-border, there are some elements when it comes to looking at your body skincare products. Typically, we see over here, there could be a GST of 7% that gets applied when it comes to, in Singapore, when it comes to food categories. There are some food categories that might be exempt from licenses, others that aren't, subject to inspections at ports. But again, there's a really important rule that gets applied when it comes to advertising and promotion. The other important part over here is just when we talk about digital free trade zones, people and businesses that have experience with China, please note that digital free trade zones in Malaysia are very, very different. They've been newly formed back in 2017, so they don't have that same level of operation sophistication that you see with some of your China free trade zones. So just note that if you're used to free trade zones in other markets, it is very different over here. In terms of regulation and in IP, the most important point over here is when it comes to intellectual property, there is this term which is called first to file and first to use. And I will say over here, when it comes to first to file, it basically means when you are obtaining any trademarks and rights, it's the person that has filed for it first will normally have superior rights, whereas in Australia we have the term that's called first to use, and that becomes a really important distinction when you are looking at this IP component. Last but not least, and I'm conscious of time, is I'd like to finish off on this particular slide over here to say that when you are looking at your e-commerce strategy, please note the most important thing is understanding that it does take a really sophisticated set of skills and capabilities. Links to this will be provided afterwards, but as an SME, just note that you need to have a strong understanding of operating in that market, knowledge of the market, having long-term trusted relationships become a really important component of your e-business. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their time on this call, as well as for some of those questions that have come through. We will be providing you with at the end of this session, there will be a survey that we'd like you to complete, and I'd like to again thank everyone as part of this Asia Business Series. That's part of Sydney's Knowledge Exchange Grant program, and also the registrations that we have that are going to be open for the third event, which is focused on exploring trade diversification and how to succeed in Asian markets, will be held on 25th of May between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. AEST. There is going to be more information on this that we provide you with shortly as well, and you will receive an email tomorrow, but please visit the Asialink Business website on asialinkbusiness.com.au. Once again, I'd like to encourage all participants to please complete the survey, and you can scan the QR code for this. But once again, thank you so much for your time and participation today.